very honored to speak with Kelly. Kelly and I have been friends for a long time. We've worked together at the Huntsman World Senior Games and in other capacities. And there are two things about Kelly that are true, and they were already mentioned. She is passionate. I think you observed that today. But she is also very compassionate. She's just a wonderful, wonderful person, and it's fun to be here with Kelly. I'm very excited to learn from Dr. Lickstein as well. I attended his speech last night and just fascinated with this area of sleep and insomnia. So I feel just honored to be here, to be a part of this conference. I was actually introduced to BYU Gerontology about a decade and a half ago, actually 16 or so years ago. Dr. Stephen Heiner was the one who introduced me at the time. Most of you students might not recognize that name, but some of you faculty might remember Dr. Heiner. He was very influential in connecting the Huntsman World Senior Games and BYU Gerontology, as well as a variety of other departments here on campus. And so we've been connected for a long time. I'm very grateful to him and for his work. Since he has passed away a few years ago, Dr. Ron Heiner and Dr. Gary Meeson have taken over and continued that legacy and that work that has been very valuable and incredibly valuable to our athletes at the Huntsman World Senior Games. And I'll tell you another thing that I have also loved about this connection is running into alumni students who are now going out in the world and doing various and different things with their lives, but who have been a part of the volunteer team that comes down and does the health screenings. I've met many of you and many of them in Walmarts around the state and around the nation, in just surprising places. I've run into people that have been a part of that. Are there any students in the room that have been a part of the health screenings down at the Huntsman World Senior Games? So there are a few of you. So let me say thank you to those that have been able to do that, and those that haven't had that opportunity, let me encourage you to try to find a way to take advantage of it. It's an incredible, incredible opportunity. Now, as you know, I work with the Huntsman World Senior Games, and that is a senior population that I work with. And I found over the years, I've worked with the World Senior Games for, this will be my 16th year, 16th Games, that almost anything can happen during the games. And you meet amazing people from all walks of life, and they all have their own stories, and they all bring just this rich tapestry of experiences to the games, and I personally and we as a team get to interact with those people, and I love it. I've been told two things. Number one is always make sure that you're not the smartest person in the room, and as I go through my mental checklist of things to do today, I'm going to immediately check that one off. I've already learned so much from people downstairs with your poster presentations, Dr. Lickstein, Kelly. So I love being here with you for that reason. And also, when you have an opportunity to speak, you should always loosen the audience up with a good joke. Well, I don't have a joke, but I do have a true story that I'd like to share with you. One of our sports at the World Senior Games is cowboy action shooting. Show of hands, is anybody familiar with cowboy action shooting? So a few of you who have been down to the games know what it is. Many of you aren't familiar with it. It's just a fun event. It's a great event. It's made up of athletes. It's a shooting event, so targets are involved. But beyond that, you have to use firearms that are either pre-1880 or replicas. So everything is a single action. Nothing is an automatic or a semi-automatic. You shoot one bullet, and then you either have to cock it or pump it to shoot it again, and that's a requirement. You can't use any other firearms. And you also have to dress the part. So we have cowboys that come and shoot, and they wear chaps and button-up shirts and big belts and giant hats and fringed vests, and then the ladies are there in hoop skirts and just the whole array. It's just amazing. It's just fun. And then the other thing that is required, and these are rules of the games. These aren't rules that you can break. This is just like the three-point line, or if you tag a runner out in softball, they're out. You have to do these things to play this sport. The other thing that you have to do is you have to have an alias. So nobody in cowboy action shooting actually uses their own names, and nobody knows anybody's real names. They all have aliases. Well, we have two athletes that were early adapters in cowboy action shooting. 20 or so years ago, they found the sport together. And they were already in the lifestyle, two cowboys from Oklahoma. And as they were introducing themselves to the sport, they realized that they needed to pick names. And because they were so early on, they had almost a free slate, you know. So they decided that they were going to be Butch Cassidy, and the other one was going to be the Sundance Kid, right? So these two would come to these cowboy action shootings, to ours, and to other events, and they'd be Butch and Sundance. And they were very popular among the athletes that come to these events, and people love them. It's a very social sport. But as I said, they already lived the lifestyle. They were two old cowboys from Oklahoma. They actually owned some ranch land and ran some cattle. One day they were out together riding across their range, and they were trying to gather up a few stray cattle that they had missed. And as they were out on the desert, the Oklahoma desert, looking out into the horizon, and the heat waves are rising, and they're looking out across the way, they saw this tree over there that looked like it was covered in bacon. And Butch looks at Sundance and says, "It looks like a bacon tree over there." So they decided together that they would go over and investigate. And as they rode over closer, all of a sudden, out of the blue, gunshots were firing all around them. And so they jumped off their horses, they got down onto the ground, they crawled over to a rock, and they're leaning up against the back of the rock, just like you've seen in these movies, you know. They're talking to each other, "How are we going to get out of this? And what are we going to do?" And they, peek their heads up over to look over at this bacon tree. And Butch comes down and he says, "Sundance, we're in trouble. We thought that was a bacon tree. It wasn't. It was actually a ham bush." Sorry, I know that's horrible. Also, not a true story. I want to clarify, not a true story. I want to talk a little bit about the Huntsman World Senior Games. Some of you might be familiar with this event. For those that are not familiar, I want to provide just a little bit of context and just a smidgen of history. The games were founded in 1987 by this gentleman here on the screen. His name is John Morgan. Truly a visionary, just an amazing, amazing individual. We lost him not this last January, but the January before, at 98 years old. And up until his 96th year, he continued to play tennis in the Huntsman World Senior Games. So not only did he have a vision for what this athletic event could be, but he really walked the walk as well as talked the talk. And he started this event with the idea of fostering worldwide peace, health, and friendship. Those are the founding principles of our games, and everything that we do around the games revolve around these three principles. Does it bring peace? Is it associated with health? Is there a friendship element that is involved in this? And since 1987, this event has grown, as Dr. Hager mentioned, to be the largest annual multi-sport event in the world for athletes over the age of 50. So when I say multi-sport event, think Olympic-style event. And it started out small. We had about 6 sports and a couple of hundred athletes in 1987, and it's just grown to be this amazing thing since then. Just last year in 2022, we offered this event, and 34 different countries were represented, 36 different sports were represented, and we hosted 11,588 total athletes. Now, I know in this day and age we throw numbers around. We have, trillions of dollars in financial deficit, and you're working with cohorts of research databases that are in the tens of thousands. So what does 11,588 mean? Just as a point of reference, that actually is larger than the Summer Olympic Games. They host about 11,000 athletes. We're about 11,600. And so it's a big event, and we get to host this event every single year. It's not something that happens every 4 years, but every year. And so it's a lot of fun to be associated and a part of it. And we've already opened registration for the 2023 games. And if our numbers hold steady, we're probably going to break that record again this year. We hope so, at least. Right now, as of today, and actually yesterday, I read this report yesterday, we have currently got 370 softball teams that have registered to compete in our event versus 348 this same time last year. We have 203 volleyball teams that are registered to compete versus 168 at this time last year. We have 607 pickleball players. Anybody familiar with pickleball? Most of us know what it is by now, right? So 607 pickleball players versus 470 a year ago. So we're on trajectory to have a fantastic year. We always open our registration at the stroke of midnight, Mountain Time, for our individual athletes on the 1st of March. So we did that a couple of weeks ago. I have bowling listed up there on the screen because by 12:27 a.m., we had already reached our participation cap in bowling. Our bowlers stayed awake through the middle of the night to register for bowling, and we have now had to close bowling. All of our other sports are still available for registration as of now, but bowling is closed. And the same thing happened when we opened team registration on January 1st. That's another tradition that we have. And registrations are going very, very well, so we're very excited about that. Again, just a little bit of context. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the economics and the economic impact. I always share this information with chambers of commerce and with city officials because it helps drive incentives for them to be involved financially with the games. I want to share it with you, though, because if there's any campus and body of students in America or around the world that understands the worth of souls, it might be this group right here. So I want to talk about it in that context. And we all know that dollars are not the only way to measure value. Certainly it's not. But it is a way to measure value. So I wanted to share some of the financial and economic impact of the games on the state of Utah specifically, and on the Washington County and in the St. George area as well. So first of all, I think it's important to understand, again, just as context, that 85% of our athletes come from outside of Utah. This is a sporting event that is not for the local athletes. Even the local athletes are very invited to be a part of it. But 85% of our almost 12,000 athletes come from outside of the state. On average, they stay in our community for 6.1 days, which is pretty extensive if you think about sporting events that maybe you participated in. A marathon, for example, many athletes will come in the night before, will run their race, and they'll go home that same day. Our athletes tend to stay for an extended period, and consequently, they leave a lot more dollars than a single day event might leave for the local economy. This last year in 2022, we estimate that the economic impact of our event for the local area was almost $22 million, $21.8 million that was brought into the local economy just during the Huntsman World Senior Games. Now, I am also not a researcher, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a statistician, so I try to break things down in a way that I can understand. And almost $22 million is the equivalent of about 3.66 million Little Caesars pizzas. Now, if you took those pizza boxes and you stacked them up on top of each other, that pile of pizza would reach 113 miles into the sky, which is 51 miles into space. So when we talk about the worth of individuals and the worth of souls and the worth of this event, it's significant. And again, as I said, dollars are only one way to measure value, but it is a way. We have a great impact on the local hotel community. I'm sure you can imagine that. Shane Whitworth is one of our valuable partners. He mentions the games is one of the highest economic impact for his properties. Over the past 10 years alone, the games have generated nearly $250 million in value, again, for the local economy. So it's a significant thing that takes place in St. George, Utah, and for the state as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits that our athletes feel as athletes, as senior athletes. Not specifically Huntsman World Senior Games athletes, but just as senior athletes. Dr. Becca George has all kinds of credentials in studying and in researching senior athletes. She not only has credentials, but she's also a personal friend. And I know that she has spent the last probably 20 years looking specifically at senior athletes. And so I want to share some of her research that she has found with you today as we talk about the benefits of being a senior athlete and competing in an event like the Huntsman World Senior Games. This first chart displays the number of days that senior athletes engage in purposeful exercise. Now, we're not talking about walking to the end of the driveway so that your dog can use the bathroom. This is somebody who wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to actually exercise. It's intentional. And if you look, almost 70% of senior athletes are exercising more than 5 days a week. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but think back to the last week. How many of us, and I'll include myself in this, have worked out more than 5 days a week? Now, some of you probably have, and if you have, that's awesome. Keep going, keep doing that. But many of us probably didn't, so there's room for improvement. But you'll look up there that a significant percentage of our athletes are participating in purposeful exercise even 7 days a week. And 6 is the biggest cohort, as you can see up there. So many of our athletes are engaging in physical activity because competition is a huge motivator. Now, I don't know if any of you played even high school sports, or if you've been able to have an opportunity to have college sports, but if you have, we know that competition is a significant motivator. I know that when I have signed up to run a race or to do a triathlon, or even in my old age to wrestle in a wrestling tournament, I have found that that has actually been a huge motivator for me, and we find that senior athletes feel that same motivation. And all of that physical activity has to have physical long-term benefits, and we found that that is the case. I'm going to go through a few charts here. I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but I think that you can see the point that I'm trying to make. Cardiovascular disease, we know, is the #1 killer of people in the world and in America, and significance of cardiovascular disease is significantly lower in senior games athletes than it is with the general population. On the chart with the blue bands there, you see that is that is men, and on the other side you see women, and you can see that senior athletes have less cardiovascular disease. Type 2 diabetes is another health concern, especially as we age in our senior population. And you can see that there is a significant difference in type 2 diabetes among senior athletes versus the general population. And even though all senior athletes demonstrate less diabetes, this is significant in that athletes who participate in cardiovascular sports such as running or soccer are almost 75% less likely to have diabetes than athletes that participate in sports that are non-cardiovascular events. So if you're looking to reduce your potential for diabetes, physical activity in senior sports is certainly a way to go. We talk a lot in our senior population about falls and falling, and as you get out into your professional careers as students, you'll know that you'll talk a lot about that. We found that senior athletes, well, first of all, the senior population falls a significant amount. 20 to 30% of seniors fall each year. Now, some of you students think about the 4 grandparents that you have. That stat means that one of them will probably fall this year. That's what that means. And of those that fall, we know that 95% of all hip fractures are due to falls. So that is significant, and we know that hip fractures are a significant health problem. Seniors who are hospitalized for a fall remain on average 9 days longer in the hospital than those who are hospitalized for another reason, and that adds up to be about $2 billion spent annually on falls treatment. So it's a significant thing. It probably won't surprise you to see that senior athletes have significantly fewer falls, even though they're participating in sports. You might think, well, maybe they'll fall down at their sport, right? But they have significantly fewer falls than the general senior population. And then we also know that senior athletes have less, again, significantly less levels of depression, anxiety, and stress, and all of that is connected to their physical activity. Now, research from here on campus, right here on BYU's campus, Dr. Julianne Holt-Blundstein, does anybody know her or have a class from her? She is really an expert in the area of loneliness. She has found that loneliness carries the same health risks as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is about 3/4 of a pack of cigarettes a day, and that social isolation is 2 times as harmful as obesity and as lethal as alcoholism. She has discovered that. That fascinated me when I first heard those statistics, and it continues to, because we know that senior sports also focus very heavily on the social aspect of the sport. And so we work with that. We know that senior athletes have found that it is very difficult to be lonely when you're working with your doubles partner on your serve on the tennis court or the pickleball court, or you're trying to get together with your team to practice for the next big softball tournament. So the social aspect is very prevalent as well. The social benefits are very prevalent as well among senior athletes. Now, I want to do, as Kelly did, share maybe a couple of stories with you of some of our athletes that have all of these health benefits available to them as they compete in the Huntsman World Senior Games or other sporting events like that. And I want to be clear on that. If you're a senior athlete but you run in a local community 5K, you've got some of those same benefits that are available to you. Or you participate in, say, the Utah Summer Games, which is a non-age-based event. All these benefits are available to athletes, but we love being a part of offering it to our senior athletes as well. Senior athletes like Marianne Daniel from Connecticut. She says, I come to these events to chase records. She doesn't just chase records, she actually catches and passes them. She is a race walker, and she has held multiple world and American records in her sport. She is a 4-time American record holder, and in 2022 she had the world leading time in race walking for her age group. She is a significant athlete, and she competed last year in the Huntsman World Senior Games. Mark O'Brien, he started to get a little bit older, and he realized that his health wasn't going the way that he wanted to. So in 2019, at 70 years old, he decided to make a goal to lose some weight, and he wanted to play in a softball tournament, and all that he wanted to do was to hit a home run. Now, if you ever played Little League or even T-ball or fast pitch softball or whatever the softball or baseball that you may have played in your life, you know what that feels like to step up to the plate and want to hit that home run. And I hope that you've had the opportunity to maybe feel what it feels like to hit a home run, because it's a significant thing. And every sport has its own version of a home run. So I hope that you have an opportunity to feel that. But by October 21, he says he had lost 30 pounds. He had played in his first Huntsman World Senior Games tournament, and he had stepped up to the plate and hit a home run. And we love being able to provide that opportunity for our athletes. This is Michael Smith. He took a hiatus of 42 years from swimming. He swam in high school. He actually got a scholarship to swim at a D2 school, and he went and he was enjoying that opportunity, but then life came along. He had to quit school because of financial situation with his family, and he stepped away from the sport of swimming for 42 years. After 4 decades, he decided, I've got to get back into it, and so he did. And now, not only has he entered the pool again, but he's stood atop the medal stand as well. And at the Huntsman World Senior Games, he won multiple gold medals. At the National Senior Games, he is a champion in the sprints. And we had him on our podcast just a couple of months ago, and it was just fun to talk to him and talk about not only the success that he's had on the medal stand, but the success that he has felt in his life, because he's come back to this sport that he has loved so much. And he just says, I felt like I had some unfinished business, and he is absolutely finishing some of that business as well. This is one of my favorites. Before I talk about Charlotte, I want you to look at this lady here, this beautiful woman. Look at her eyes, the charisma, the joy, the leadership that you see in her. This is Charlotte Sandal. Charlotte turned 100 years old last year. She came to our event by herself. I wanted her to be a part of our opening ceremonies, and I was trying to track her down. So I called her 76-year-old daughter to see if she could get a hold of her, and she had to try to call her and track her down, and unfortunately we weren't able to. But as I was talking to her daughter, I thought, her grandchildren are 50, her great-grandchildren are 30, her great-great-grandchildren are your age. So this is Charlotte Sandal. She is an amazing, amazing athlete. She registered for 9 different swimming events. We have many athletes that register for 9 swimming events. We have many athletes that don't end up swimming all of them. Charlotte swam all of them, from the 50-meter sprint to the 1,500-meter distance. And at 100 years old, you would think, well, every time she steps into the pool, she sets a world record. That is actually not true. When she gets into the pool, there are records that she has to break. But this year, she was able to break 5 national records, and she has 3 world records that are pending. An incredible example. The last one that I want to talk to you about, and these are just a small handful of the thousands of stories that I could share with you, but I want to share my favorite story with you to close things out here, and that is the story of my mom. When I started with the Huntsman World Senior Games 16 years ago, I immediately started working on both of my parents to compete. And I got all the same excuses that I often hear from people. I'm too old, I'm not in shape, I'm too busy. But after several years of working on my mom, and purely out of it's because it's you, not because she wanted to, but because it was me and I was her son and she wanted to support me, she finally signed up for her first ever 5K. She had never had the opportunity to compete as a senior, as an athlete, as a youth. She grew up in Levan, Utah, which is just a little bit north of Nephi, if you know where Nephi is. She went to Juab High School. They just didn't have girls' sports when she went to school. So she never had that opportunity. Now, she was competitive. She would jump rope anybody into the ground. She would play jacks and beat everybody on the playground. But she never had an opportunity to compete in an organized sporting event. And so when she signed up for the Huntsman World Senior Games 5K, this was her first time ever. And we were all so excited. I have 5 brothers and sisters. We all came, except for one older brother who was not able to make it. We all came to support her for her first ever running event. And she got up onto the starting line, and I will always remember this. In my picture, I will always have this, in my mind, I will always have this picture of my mom who was standing there in an oversized baggy t-shirt and a pair of jeans culottes. Does anybody know what that is? Clam tater shorts. She had a pair of tennis shoes on, and she was standing right next to a lady of Asian descent who was wearing a sports bra and like track and field briefs. Like, that was it. And I was juxtapositioning these two athletes in my mind, and there was my mom, and here was this athlete who had come to run. The pistol fired, everybody took off, and they ran, and we were just there so excited. And 35, 40 minutes later, my mom came across the finish line, and I could not have been more proud of her. She had gotten out of her comfort zone, even though she was only doing it for me, but she got out of her comfort zone. She ran this race, and I was so excited to just be a part of that in her life. And I asked her, how do you feel? You just ran your first ever 5K race. And she said, I feel pretty good. The pistol went off. I got out there. She said, I got stuck behind this guy who was in his 80s. And I didn't pass him because I just felt rude. So I just kept running along behind him. And I was like, yeah, I remember him. Wow, he crossed the finish line right in front of you. But I said, Mom, it's a race. You're supposed to pass people. Like, that's the whole point of what we're doing here. She said, I know. She said, I'm going to go home and I'm going to practice. I'm going to train. And next year, I'm not only going to run this race, but I'm actually going to compete. And she did. She went home and she practiced. She paced off in our church gymnasium how many laps she would have to run 3.1 miles. And she woke up every morning. I grew up in Ashton, Idaho, small little town. Even through the winter, she would wake up in the morning, she would drive to the church, she would practice every single day, and she would run. And she knew how far she had to run and what she needed to do to practice. And so she practiced. And the day of the race came, and there she was again at the starting line with some form-fitting athletic apparel, a pair of leggings and a nice t-shirt. Actually, her t-shirt says the world's okayest runner. You probably can't see that from the screen there, but that's what her shirt says. And the pistol went off and she took off. And we were so excited for her once again as a family because we knew that she had put her heart and soul into it. Now, on our bibs, we have age groups in the Huntsman World Senior Games, so you can tell when people come across the finish line and people that are in front of you if you need to chase them down, right? So we were watching, and people started to come across the finish line in about 18 minutes, which is a pretty fast 5K, but we have runners that cross the line in about 18 minutes. So they started to come across. I knew my mom was not going to come in at 18 minutes. I knew that wasn't going to happen. But I started to get excited as I watched people come across. But eventually I saw this lady come across that had my mom's age group on her bib number. And I thought, well, that's fine. Silver medal is great. At the World Senior Games, that's an accomplishment. And then a few minutes later, or seconds later, I saw another woman who came across, and she had my mom's age group on it. And I thought, the bronze medal at the World Senior Games is still great. There's nothing wrong with that. And then a minute or so later, I saw another lady come across with my mom's age group. And it's not about the medals, you guys. It's the experience, right? It's the journey. So I was still excited for my mom to be there, and I knew that she had put her heart and soul into it. But I got called away for just a second to help set up some tables and chairs, and I came back over to the finish line just in time to watch a woman come around this group of shrubs. And I looked at her come around the corner, and she was just in trouble. She was in trouble. Her knees had completely locked out. She couldn't bend her knees. She was bent over double at the waist. And she was just staggering. And as an event organizer, there's a little bit of like, here's a financial liability. If she goes down, there's going to be an injury and a potential lawsuit. So I immediately moved over to see if I could help this lady. And I was from me to you when I realized that that lady was my mom. And I will tell you, I have never in my entire life been more terrified or proud in my entire life. I grabbed her by the arm, and she was cold and clammy and sweaty, and I stood her up, and I was like, Mom, it's okay. You're okay. You made it. There's the finish line. And she looked up and she saw the inflatable arch, and it says welcome there. It says finish on the other side. And as she looked up and she saw that, she realized that she had made it, and she, boom, elbowed me in the chest, and she ran across the finish line all by herself under her own power. Now, my mom was fine. She got some oranges. She just hadn't eaten breakfast because she was so nervous, talking about nutrition. And the church gym was a little bit flatter than the undulations of the 5K race that we had available for her. Now, the thing is that didn't discourage my mom. She continued to train, and she continued to get better. And since that day, I'm proud to say that my mom has actually won medals, and even a few gold medals at the Huntsman World Senior Games, including this most recent last one, where she crossed the finish line 3 minutes in front of the next lady in her age group. But in addition to just the medals that she's won, she's also become an athlete, which is something that she had never considered herself up until that point. And we love at the World Senior Games being a part of that, being able to provide that opportunity to athletes of all skill levels from all around the world to come together and be a part of something really special. I know we're going to have an opportunity for questions a little bit later, so I'll reserve that for later. I would like to say, if anything that I have said, any of the stories that I have said have inspired you, then use that inspiration. Stay active. I was told by one of our senior athletes one time when I asked him, how do you do this at 70? He said, if you want to be where I am at 70, you've got to be active in your 60s. And if you want to be active in your 60s, you've got to make sure that you're active in your 50s. And if you want to be competitive in your 50s, you've got to get after it in your 40s. And of course, it goes on down. So stay involved, stay active, stay engaged, find ways to use competition as a motivation. And then I'd also just encourage you to follow us on our social media, as well as subscribe to our podcast, where we visit with these athletes and other health professionals from all around the world on a weekly basis. And I want to thank you so much for your time, and look forward to answering any questions that you might have after Dr. Lickstein. Thank you so much.